Yeah, Pretty Boy and the Gunpowder. It's a song about a river. In the tradition of Maryland, oh Maryland, it's about a Maryland river, and I'm from Maryland. I was home for the holidays, and my brother and I, did a lot of hiking in the Gunpowder and the Little Gunpowder, and during the winter, everything's kind of not gray, but all the leaves are gone, so when you're hiking along the river, you have a really clear view into the floodplain, and not just the floodplain, but then the terrace. There's a second terrace, and the second terrace puzzled my brother and I. We knew that, okay, on the floodplain, look, you can see all the different features. Abandoned oxbows, the Yazoo tributaries, the main stem, the rapids. Then there are, a lot of archaeological features, and that's also featured in the song. But then there's this second terrace, and I said to my brother, that second terrace, when does water get up there? And he said, well, not recently, because look, it's filled in with pretty tall, mature trees. If they were regularly getting inundated. And I said, I wonder if the reservoirs upstream, the Loch Raven and the Pretty Boy Reservoir, if they don't repress flows to a point that floodwaters don't make it up into that second terrace. And a little about the river, the Gunpowder. It was one of the hardest working rivers in America. It was before coal power, before gasoline, before trains. The settlers came, and that was the corridor they settled in, and they formed several mills up and along the length, on the Little Gunpowder and the Big Gunpowder, and they were powered by water. And the agricultural areas up on the hills, they ground the grain in those mills, but then they also made rifles for the coming Revolutionary War. And it's an interesting landscape, because I always think, where I grew up, Harford County, I always say I'm a Marylander, but I'm really a Harford/Baltimore Countian, and that really means I'm a Piedmont plateauer. But a plateau, you think of being flat, and this plateau is a very hilly landscape. And when you hike along the river corridors, you realize that the rivers are what cut into the plateau. So when you're looking up at the top of the hills, you're looking up at the remnant sections of the plateau. That's where the settlers originally moved, along the mill, and that seemed to be in the path of progress, and they built a railroad down there. There's the Ma and Pa Railroad, and that just, that was, when the railroads came around, that was, and towns fought to get in the path of progress on those railroads, and they were the railroad and the river, that was the kingmaker, those towns. Then, here we are, 90 years later, and it's all returned to nature. What happened? Out west on the Intercontinental Railroad, if you got put on the path of the railroad, you turned into a big metropolis. You were a winner. If you didn't, your town was almost destined to be preserved in time and returned to nature, a ghost town. That's kind of what happened on the Lower Gunpowder, where in the headwaters then, with the advent of gasoline, the other areas became more populated. Up on top of the plateau, the port, the downstream mouth of the Gunpowder, silted in from the waterworks upstream and the agriculture, whereas the deeper water bay in Baltimore became a nexus for development. And that's what happened to the headwaters of the Gunpowder. They formed those two reservoirs. So the Pretty Boy, kind of won. Kingmaker sending the water over to Baltimore, but somehow maybe that downstream stretch returned to nature. Yeah, so about the song, you need to write songs about, my brother commented, he said, yeah, people never knew these trails existed, and then they built a couple parking lots, and now people use them all the time. They can't get out there enough. I think that's where the song comes in. It's kind of like, not a parking lot, but it helps people connect with the the river that they're hiking. I mean, I looked at a map of the Chesapeake Bay watershed, and they have the Susquehanna, and they have about 11 different watersheds. They don't even have the Gunpowder. And the Gunpowder is pretty significant. I mean, it's not the size of the Susquehanna. It made me think, why don't they have the Gunpowder? And I think it's because of this cartological confusion that its headwaters are actually diverted over into the Patapsco River. So they weren't sure, do we put the Patapsco or do we put the Gunpowder? The Patapsco/Gunpowder was just kind of confusing. So the story of the Gunpowder needs to be told, and I think the story is best understood between the old run of the river where the mills once thrived but then returned to nature, and there's still remnants of the rail grade and the mills and the archaeological ruins, and then some of that's turned into a county park, versus kind of the kingmaker of the Pretty Boy, that it won. You know, it was like, oh, we're the stretch that's going to serve the greater good, and we're going to fill it all in. But for what? You know, I think not for what. It's just today the area that fell out of the path of progress is a thriving piece of nature, and nature has reclaimed it, where the Pretty Boy Reservoir is the holding tank for Loch Raven that feeds the Baltimore metropolitan area, and they need their water, but it's, you know, a human use of water, and it's good to see water, you know, in its natural state. So I think there's a big story, a larger story to be told here, that the Gunpowder is still a working river. It still supports the ports, the wharfs, and the industry of Baltimore in ways that aren't appreciated, just like it supported those old mill towns. So what else about this song? You know, I modeled it loosely after Poncho and Lefty. I just felt like there was a story in the tradition of Francis Scott Key, who wrote The Star-Spangled Banner. This isn't that level of song. Or maybe Maryland, My Maryland. You know, hopefully it goes into the canon of Maryland songs. You know, there's Maryland, My Maryland, The Star-Spangled Banner. I might contact the local newspaper to see if they could feature it, and maybe it could be voted as Baltimore County's official song. You know, the Gunpowder pretty much takes up a good third, if not half, of the county, and it does contribute to water supply, so maybe it could be embraced. If that's the case, maybe we'll, you know, songs get refined over time. Otherwise, I just tried to capture aspects of the history and the relationship between the reservoir, Pretty Boy Reservoir, and the old downstream run of the Gunpowder that feeds the bay, and tell that story. You know, there's still the two runs need to be talking to each other, so I tried to, you know, get that conversation going again. And it was because my brother and I were hiking it so much, so I think we hiked it every day we were back. It's good to get out on the river.